and welcome back to the live series podcast brought to you by Amicus Recruitment. This is the podcast that gives you insight into the life and role of tech leaders from all over the world. And today I'm joined by Ivett Ördög, engineering manager over at Contenful. Thank you for coming on, Ivett. Really appreciate it. How are you doing?
Hi, I'm good, thank you, and I'm happy to be here.
Me too. I mean, definitely me too. I was explaining to you before, anyone that watches regularly will notice that I'm in a completely different environment to what I usually am. It's looking a little bit plain, but we're going to get some stuff up on the walls, and I've got my own new microphone and everything, and a massive ring light right in front of me. And it's because Amicus recently moved their HQ in Manchester City Centre, and I've now got a dedicated podcast booth, which I'm very happy to have. So Ivett, like I said, thank you for coming on. I know when we've chatted before, it's been really interesting kind of going over a couple of things that you've been really into. But for anybody that hasn't, maybe before we get into that, has anyone not really heard of you or heard of Contenful, for example? Do you maybe want to just describe your career up to this point?
Okay, so I started programming very early on. I actually had the luck that my father was also a software engineer, and I was 8 years old when he first showed me how to write code in Q Basic. So got a really early start there. And sometimes joke that I started working on legacy code right away, because those of you who remember QBasic, there was these two demo games, the gorillas and this little snakes game. And the first thing I did was trying to change those, and that's how I got started. And then after that, I already, like, when in the 90s the whole World Wide Web craze hit, I immediately learned JavaScript and PHP, and I very early on, I was still in high school when I had my first paid gigs, where I was developing websites. And then I very early on started having people who work for me, like subcontractors. And that's why once I was done with my PhD, I actually did a PhD in bioinformatics. Researching drugs was a huge topic that we could go into at some point. But after that, when I joined first Immersis, I very early on became a team lead, and I have been managing teams for the last 15 years already. And for the last 3 years, I've been just managing teams and not coding anymore. I sometimes joke that the code is just, I wrote all the code that I could, which is not entirely true. I do still write code, but I do feel that it has to be a hobby at this point, because couldn't really have that impact anymore as a coder. And other than that, like, one of the things that I really want to I'm really proud of is what I did with Lean Poker. We can also go a bit deeper into that, but the very TLDR is that it's a workshop that is designed to help teams practice, like, have a practical or hands-on experience with continuous deployment and lean methodologies, because people learn a lot about agile, about lean, about continuous delivery. But my experience is that even those who know how to do it in theory usually fall short in practice. So I created this environment that is all about practicing, and that's been something that I've been running as a side business.
Yeah, we'll definitely come to Lean Poker. It's certainly something that interested me when we had our initial chat before recording last week. It was quite a new concept to me as someone who obviously hasn't necessarily ever been a manager in tech. It's the agile and most methodologies, sorry, have kind of been a fairly sort of revolutionary thing for me personally to discover, as someone who's kind of, fairly early to middleweight in their career. But in terms of I mean, we will get into lean poker, but in terms of your approach to managerial styles, what would you kind of say that your approach is? And I got the impression before that you foster a very collaborative culture, and that you culture is a really important thing to you, right? So how do you approach that? What do you kind of prioritize when it comes to management?
Yeah, so one thing that I actually have on my LinkedIn profile as my title is that I'm an engineering culture advocate, and that is really what I think of myself as. I do think that to have a successful team, you have to have a culture of continuous improvement. You have to have a culture of let's get these things done. Let's make sure that we have something that we can release as soon as possible. And that culture of it's not a problem if it's not the perfect thing. Just get it out the door. And like dare to fail. These things are, I think, very important. And when I look at and when I say that, when someone asks me what does it mean that I'm a engineering culture advocate, I could say that it's what agile coach should be, but it isn't. Because what I see a lot of the times is that companies, as they try to adopt agile, they learn about the theory, learn about how they should do stand-up meetings and such, but they fail to understand the practical implications of that and just rename things so that it sounds agile, but it isn't actually. So to actually get there, to actually have an agile culture that is all about delivering value early enough, that's where you actually have to show people in practice how they can do it. And really that's my mission as an engineering manager and as an engineering culture advocate, is to create an environment for people where they can learn this kind of attitude of like this culture of continuously putting ourselves out there.
Yeah, that makes so much sense as well. In terms of like when you say you adopting a collaborative culture and being a culture advocate, obviously, which is something again that I was really drawn to you as a guest to talk about, because I think culture is really important. When you're managing a team, I mean, I think you said that Contentful is a significant team, number wise, but in terms of how you get to know your team individually and how you get to kind of understand individual characteristics and kind of, I know it's one thing to get a team to collaborate on a professional level, but you do need to have a kind of deeper level of understanding of the individuals personally, almost, don't you? You know, you don't need to be crossing boundaries necessarily to really interrupt people's lives so you're getting to know them, but you definitely do need an understanding of people on the team individually, don't you?
Definitely. And I think that's, I mean, I have a very, okay, so one thing is I have a fairly hands-off style of managing. So I usually don't, I never micromanage. It's a very rare case where I exercise my role and say, I'm your engineering manager and you're going to do this. This is actually something I only did once in the last 3 years. And that's what I strive for, right? I want to create a situation where I can trust my team to do the right thing. And part of it is of course understanding the team. And for me, it comes down a lot to the one-on-ones, right? Talking to people and understanding them, but also to being vulnerable. So one of the things that I always start with when I have a new team is revealing my weaknesses as early as possible, which is very counterintuitive. You know, most people when they become leaders, they don't want to show that they are weak in a sense, right? I do the opposite. Hey, people, this is where I'm good. This is where I'm not good. This is where I need your help. And I try to be very open about what I struggle with, what are the problems that I'm trying to solve. All this transparency is very important because once you are very open to your people, then they will also be open to you. They will also reveal their weaknesses, and that gives you a great opportunity to help them.
Yeah, 100%. I think this is such an important topic in terms of, you know, the differentiation, the difference between trying to kind of show some vulnerability. But you know, you do kind of have an aspect. I think people tend to have a guard up when they enter a managerial role, right? And they want to kind of look like someone who's super reliable, super confident, and kind of prove that that's the reason why they're in that role, is because they kind of know more than others. Whereas the reality is you need to show some vulnerability to be approachable to your team as well. And you don't need to kind of self-deprecate and make yourself look worse than you are, but everyone has weaknesses, like you said, and it's so important to communicate that. And, you know, you can actually hire people on your team to fill those skill gaps, and you'd be much more of a more successful team with those gaps kind of filled like that. But you're not going to get there until you're open about it and you're communicating about it.
And there is one very important point there, is that when you go into a managerial role with your guard up, you think that you are showing that you are strong. You think that you show that you are a capable leader. But in reality, people will notice your weaknesses. And you not being open about your weaknesses upfront will inevitably, on the long term, paint you as a leader who is not capable, as a leader who is not doesn't have the skills that they should have. I think it's much better to be open about where you think you have your areas of improvement, than let your team figure out and then think that you are not their leader, that you're not being able to do what you are supposed to do.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And I think your approach of kind of being hands-off, and I think just that kind of sort of servant coaching approach, where you're kind of there to empower your team and not dictate to them, is really, that's definitely something that I would 100% strive to be as a manager. So we've kind of gone over how you get your team to collaborate a little easier, and I kind of just want to summarize kind of this first sort of part of the episode before we kind of start talking and getting into lean poker. How do you kind of successfully kind of review, I'll reword that, how do you kind of review your culture and to know that it's really successful? Do you review it? Or I know you said that you have one-on-ones and things like that, but what does an overall successful culture look like to you? And I'm aware that's quite a generic question, but I just kind of want to get your input on that.
Here is the thing. I don't have an answer to what a good culture is, other than a good culture is one that has good output, right? So this is the really tough thing, because not every team is the same. You have a different team, you have a different company, you have a different product than me. I could tell you what a good team culture looks like, but it's going to be what my team looks like when it's working. It doesn't say anything about another team with another product, with another environment. It's very different to create a product in finance, and it's very different to create a product in marketing, right? So guess what I'm trying to say is that you have to figure out yourself what a good team culture is for you. And the one thing that you should probably strive for is to make sure that that team culture results in the output that you expect. And the one way to make sure that it results in the output that you expect is make sure that you are going in really, really small steps. And even if you're not releasing all of that into production, there are environments where you cannot do that. You should strive for that, but sometimes you can't. But what's important is that you should be able to release at any point. Like if your team is able to, if you like snap your fingers and say, we are releasing right now, and your team says, yes, I think then you are in a good position.
Yeah, perfect. Love that answer. Love that answer. It is a simple thing at the end of the day, isn't it? But I really like that your point of saying you know, it's on you to figure it out yourself, because you have all these different influences from all your past experiences, and there's a reason that you're in that leadership role now. So it kind of is on you, not just because it's your responsibility to look after the culture, but actually because you're there for a reason, to have that input, and people want that from you. That's why you're in that role anyway. So open up a little bit and kind of, like you said previously, show a little bit of vulnerability, and your culture will kind of stem from that. It's a really good point.
And also, kind of the reason is like, kind of the thing is that it might sound hard, but here is the good news, because it is hard, and because it's not like a recipe that I can share right away. For quite a while, ChatGPT isn't going to replace you as a manager.
I love that. I love that. I'm not sure I've been worrying about that just yet for my job. There's a lot of things floating around in the marketing world that ChatGPT is going to be the end, but I agree with you. I think it's got a long way to go before we get to that point yet. But one thing I really want to talk about, and I know that you'd be quite eager to talk about as well, Ivett, is lean poker. Now, I hadn't heard of this concept before meeting you. So, and I obviously know a little bit about it now, but for anyone else who hasn't heard of it, just give us a little breakdown, and we can kind of go into, after that, maybe a little more about how it can affect directly the function of a team.
Okay, so basically, as I said, the whole idea of lean poker started about 10 years ago already. It's quite an old idea when our company was adopting continuous delivery. And what I noticed is that people are kind of reluctant, because they are used to delivering every 3 months. And then when they deploy code into production, then they have a bunch of bugs, and everyone was worried that if we do that daily, then we will have that much bugs every day, right? So when I started out, I just wanted to create an environment that proves to people that delivering frequently is actually something that's beneficial and not something scary. But then it became so much more. So by now, what lean poker gives people is an environment where they can experience what it looks like to deliver, and why it is very useful. So and I'm going to give you a very specific example in a second, but for that, first I need to talk about how lean poker is set up specifically. So lean poker is a gamified workshop where you have teams of engineers working. Each team has a bot, basically a really simple service. This can be in any language, by the way. Currently, I support like 14 different languages. And this service does one thing: it plays poker, specifically Texas Hold'em. And the goal of the teams is to work on this service and improve it in such a way that it ends up winning games against the other teams' services, right? So we have this really exciting game where and I don't know, in 9 a.m. in the morning, we get together, we have an introduction at 10 a.m. These bots are starting playing against each other. And from that point on, the teams can deploy at any time, but the games are running constantly. Every few seconds, there is a game. And every few seconds, one team is going to get points, another team is not going to get points. And to get ahead in this game, you always need to be just a little bit better than the other teams, right? And what's interesting is that even teams that are coming from a background where they are delivering every few months, even these teams end up delivering every 10 to 20 minutes, sometimes even every 5 minutes, which is crazy if you think about it. Like, show me one company that in practice deploys code into production every 5 minutes. There is one I know about, which is Pinterest, but very few companies can do that in practice. Yet when people come into a lean poker event, they immediately do it. And what was a really interesting learning, and this is where I come back to the specific example of what this does to people. So at the end of one of these events, Llewellyn Farco, who is some of you might know him as the person who came up with acceptance test. Sorry, no, Approval testing. Yeah. So he's the guy who came up with approval testing, and he was at one of these lean poker events. In the end, he just said, you know what? Think about it. If Ivett told one team that they are not allowed to deploy only once half an hour, but every other team can deploy whenever, would you feel that it's fair? And everyone was like, no, that wouldn't be fair. We would completely obliterated by the other teams if we weren't able to deploy just once half an hour. Okay, how about 10 minutes? Still unfair. How about 5 minutes? Still unfair. How about 3 minutes? Okay, I guess we could work with that. And that was a really interesting, because what Lillian said, then why aren't you deploying that often in your production, in your real life? Why are you holding off on those deployments, right? And I think that was a very good way of putting it, because he kind of showed people that, yeah, when we have the opportunity to deploy that often, all of the impediments are gone, and it's all about just us deploying and all about us feeling on our skin that if we don't deploy, then we are going to fall behind the other team. Then we naturally start doing that, and I think that's so profound. And this is basically, this is what I want to give. This experience is what I want to give people when they come to an Invoker. This experience of why it is so important to deploy early and often.
Yeah, I think it does sound really interesting, to be honest. And I think it was quite I like you really like the analogy of kind of, well, it wasn't even an analogy, it was quite a straightforward experiment almost, wasn't it, to see what the developers thought was fair, but then actually they're doing themselves an injustice in the working world, essentially. But when you actually write it on paper and put it in front of them very plainly, it's quite obvious that there is a massive difference between theoretically what they like to do and what they're actually doing in practice. So how do kind of teams, once they kind of have you heard things about how teams have actually gone on to implement lean poker in their own kind of ways of working and things? Does it affect the functionality, or is it more like subtleties that are kind of injected a little bit over time?
So I think my ideal customer when it comes to lean poker is a company that already heard a lot about agile and about continuous delivery, and they think they are doing it, but may not have the outcome that they expect, right? And what I can bring and what I have consistently delivered on for these teams is that they get this one-day experience, and sometimes they come back they fairly often come back for a second and third, and like do it once half a year. But what it does to them is that they kind of get reminded of what are the things where they can still improve. It's a great way to find out where the gaps are in your process and what impediments you need to remove. And I have seen several companies do that. There was one very interesting example that was more an exception, but I really like that example because it was very profound. Sometimes some companies decide to also bring in their product managers into the game, and this company have decided that they brought in their engineers plus their product people, and their product people read up on poker strategies beforehand. And what was really interesting is that in this company, the product people were sitting on a separate floor from the engineers. They had their own room. And what they changed after the lean poker, because they were sitting there next to the team for a whole day, and it was so productive. The next time I came, it turned out that they moved the product managers. They weren't sitting on a separate floor anymore. They were sitting next to their teams, which is, I think, one of these very specific learnings that the company took away. There are other learnings. Different companies learn different things, but they are maybe less tangible sometimes. This is a very tangible change.
Yeah, I think I absolutely love that last point there about them kind of moving physically closer to become more progressive. Obviously, I don't know if that's like a specific thing that you kind of bring up to their attention, but that is quite an obvious thing. But it says a lot about the mentality shift because even though it's an obvious thing, it's not necessarily something anyone would have remotely thought about in an office environment. You come in, you sit at your desk, you do your work, and you leave. And you obviously, as an engineer, you're constantly trying to think of ways to be more efficient and ways to function quicker and things like that, and be able to deploy things faster. But ultimately, it does definitely take, an external kind of perspective. And I feel like that's something important for a lot of managers to kind of get that external perspective on, not to critique them or think about, like what they're doing wrong, but definitely, like you said, to open their eyes and help them with the small changes that can definitely, in the long term, really help a team become more functioning.
And also, to be fair, this is a very pre-pandemic story, right? We don't have people in the office anymore in a lot of the companies. But even then, I think where the real shift is in thinking is that if your product manager feels like it's part of the team and really works together with the team and isn't just coming from the outside telling the team what to do, that's the real shift that changed there, right? So they realize that the engineers actually can have very valuable input into their product work. And I think that was the main shift, not the physical moving, but the physical moving definitely is a good representation of that mindset change.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with that, to be honest. It was something that I picked up on just because I thought it was really interesting. Of obviously, not to oversight anything that you'd said, but obviously I thought that was a really interesting aftermath, a really interesting physical result. And like you said, it's pre-pandemic, but it's really good to hear that kind of thing happening. So in terms of you can kind of link lean poker into this a little, but we spoke a little bit before about people's individualities and how that affects function on a team. Does lean poker work with everybody? Does it is there something that can be changed within, how do teams adapt as individuals to this kind of way of doing things? Is it something that people learn easily? Is it something that people need to work on a lot together? Is it something that can it actually bring a different side out in an individual even?
Okay, so when it comes to lean poker, I think it's something that is good for everyone, from junior engineers to senior engineers. Really doesn't matter. And honestly, like what I've seen is teams that were very functional in their continuous deployment and lean mindset, even they could take something away. So it's very interesting where you have this is basically really just a framework, right? It's not a very predetermined workshop where you have the same learnings every time. This is just a framework for learning. And because of that, it really well adapts to the environment, really well adapts to the specific theme. One thing to be very aware of, though, is that this 8 hours isn't going to change your team from one day to the other. It's going to catalyze. So once you have that one day, people will walk away and they will start doing the things the same way they did before, because they need time to process it, to start asking questions, to have retros where it comes up. Okay, remember when we had lean poker that we did this, and why aren't we doing that right here, right now? And these questions to arise, and for the team to find the solutions, because in many cases there are actually impediments there, right? So for example, you might not be able to do deployment every 5 minutes because you just have a test suite that runs for 2 hours. Of course, you are not going to deploy every 5 minutes then, right? So for the team to find the impediments, to solve the impediments, that's going to take a while. But what lean poker does is that shows people what's possible. It shows them the goal, and then they can go and gradually implement and gradually improve in that direction. So that I think that's what is to be expected from this event.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's quite a realistic view on things, and a lot of the time you'll kind of get sold these things as a manager, won't you, to kind of be like, you know, this will change your team forever, this will bring you so much more productive kind of strategies and etc., etc. But then the reality is the takeaway is actually quite small. I love that you're realistic about how it's a catalyst towards a team, and it's not gonna, you know, that isn't the point of lean poker anyway, is it really, to change the complete way that team functions? It's essentially a way to kind of, like you said, use as an example and use as a benchmark for productivity within your team, which I think is a great thing. So we kind of, I always ask as the last question, I always ask this because I think it's quite clear that you're a very knowledgeable person in your career, and you obviously have a really good grasp on what it takes to be a successful kind of manager of people, for lack of a better phrase, and you know, and you're clearly a very insightful person. So what kind of advice would you have for people who want to be in a similar position to you, or even someone who is maybe considering looking at sort of functional changes that can relate to lean poker?
So there is a lot to unpack there. So one is how do you get to that position, right? And the other is, once you are in that position, what do you do? And I think that for the question of how do you become an engineering manager if you are not an engineering manager yet, for me, one of the things that I kind of learned over the years is that you always get promoted to the role that you are already doing. So one advice I can always give is, don't wait for the promotion to do your best job. Just make sure that you start doing what you think an engineering manager should be doing. Even better yet, notice the things that your leader is not doing right and try and do instead of them. They will, one, be very grateful that you took part of their job, but also it is a great opportunity to, you know, try your hands at things and try and improve on things. So basically, just to become an engineering manager, I think the first step is to start acting like one and bringing in those thoughts. But once you are an engineering manager, I think then there is another interesting problem, because then you are ending up in a new team, a team that you don't know, and you don't know how they work right now. And I think the trick there, or the very important thing that you should be doing, is doing nothing and listening. And this is very important, because the mistake that I think a lot of rookie managers do is they think that their job is, when they come in, that they should fix everything right away. That's not how it works. This is how you make your team hate you. What you can do is just lay back, listen to the team for a couple of weeks, understand the current dynamics, understand what are the things that, like, make notes of what you think could be better, and then choose one that you can try and push the team towards. But don't tell them to do these things like this or that. Like, inspire them, show them the opportunities, show them the ways you can make them improve. And I think there is also like one thing that where lean poker can come into that picture is, when you have a new team and you see that there are things that they struggle with, one way to actually make them notice that they are struggling with it without telling them that, hey, you are not doing this right, is to create an environment where they can realize themselves that it's not good, that they could do it better. And of course, that's what lean poker is for.
That's lean poker. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, to be honest. It's kind of a polite way of pointing things out, isn't it, to your team, which makes a lot of sense. Yeah. I especially love your point there of kind of sitting back a little bit and not just instantly, like, I think people do tend to put a lot of pressure on themselves, especially if it's a new company and you haven't been internally promoted. Then you kind of just want to kind of barge in and bulldoze everything and let everybody know that you know what you're doing, and that you know your kind of way is the high, you know, it's your way or the highway. But sit back, take a breather, listen, absorb everything, right? It's, you don't know everything, especially if it's a new company, and it doesn't matter kind of what seniority level you're really at. You actually don't really know fully until you've spent some time within that group of people.
And especially when you are going to a new company, is very, very important to first listen. Because one thing that is like, every time when someone new enters a room, that person is going to point out that there is that it's smelling here. It smells like humans, because they haven't been in that room. Everyone else got used to the smell. They haven't. But here's the thing, part of the smell is actually what makes the team work. So the trick is, while you're learning how that team works and getting used to the smell, you also want to make sure that you like don't forget about that first sense of smell, and you try to over time notice what are the things that are actually a problem and what are the things that you assumed could be a problem but aren't. And once you understand those things, then you can make changes. But first, you actually have to get used to the smell.
Yeah, I'd agree with that fully. I think moving to a different company for any kind of role is not only daunting, but it doesn't have to be daunting, but you have to kind of make an actual effort to get to know the people around you as individuals, because I think, I mean, in a vague way, I think there is kind of almost a template of, depending on the size of the company, a template of certain characters in an office, for example, or in a team, or remotely even, depending on maybe job description or things like that. And some people do things differently, some people say different things. Like you said, there's certain smells that you might not recognize straight away, but in reality, it's probably just a different way of doing something that you already know, or it's a different smell that of something that you're already familiar with, and it's very much can be adapted to. And I think managerial positions are the same as well. I think that's a great analogy. I love that smell analogy as well. That's a really good line. Well,
no. You come up with it.
No, you're right though, it's absolutely spot on. I think I've come to the end of kind of what I initially really wanted to chat to you about, but I think at the beginning you mentioned there was a couple of things that we could definitely go over more, so I'd love to have you back on the show at some point, Ivett, and kind of deep diver what dive deeper. I don't know what is going on with my words today. It's the excitement of the new office, surely. But yeah, we'll dive deeper into some of the topics, and I can catch up on you with you about lean poker as well, and see how that's all developed. And yeah, I wish you the best of luck with everything as well. And I'd love to kind of catch up with you again in a few months' time and things like that.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Perfect. If you're watching on YouTube, you can hover over the logo in the corner and hit subscribe. Follow us on Insta, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and TikTok for updates. Go to our website for all of our opportunities as well. If you're a software developer, there's some absolutely lovely roles up there at the moment that you're going to want to go and check out. Thank you so much again, Ivett. I'll definitely have you on again. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. I enjoyed being here and discussing these topics.
Me too.
Bye.